So a few months ago, Bob and I went up to Indiana for this conference, and we're going there for just info about discipleship. And I wasn't sold on it initially, but once I get up there, I actually got my bell rung, and it was phenomenal content. I walked away super excited about the content that had come our way and what we could do with that here at Madison Hills. But in end of day one, I started feeling just a little ill. And this was supposed to be a 2.5-day conference. So Monday, Tuesday, and then half a day Wednesday. But Monday, I'm starting to feel that little bit of just that wave of exhaustion maybe, or the beginning of some kind of achiness. And I know that we're 6 hours away from home, and I'm like, I do not want to wake up Wednesday morning feeling like that far away. So I may leave Tuesday. So Monday rolls around, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just hang out. I'm going to rest well. I'm going to go to bed early, sleep in a little bit. And I'm thinking, anyway, it's no big deal if I sleep in Tuesday morning. Because the conference, even though it says it starts at 8:30, really doesn't start till 9:30. And here's what I mean by that. At 8:30, there's worship. And when you hear that word worship, you probably already know, if you've been around church for a while, that it's singing. So I'm thinking, it doesn't really start until 9:30. But Monday was fantastic. The worship was great. The teaching was great. Everything like that. But I'm not feeling good. So wake up Tuesday and I'm like, I'm just going to sleep in and miss the worship. It's no big deal. So get up a little late, drive over, and I get to the church where this is being hosted, and I go in and I'm about to walk into my seat, which is a table setting, and it's up front. So I'm navigating my way through people just worshiping. The room's a little dark. Their hands raised, some of them are fully spread out. Some are sitting, but I find my way, and some stuff like that's a little embarrassing, but eventually I get up there to my seat. And I'm like, okay, so I just lock in and I just start rolling with the flow. Well, the song ends, and the two people who are hosting, a man and a woman, they come up and they start talking about the day's events, what's going to happen today and the next day. And this gal starts talking and she says, and you'll know that tomorrow is a half day, but we still want you to be there. You need to be here at 8:30 because 8:30 is when the conference begins. And 8:30, and then it's like she's scanning the room, and then she just finds me. And we're about this far apart. And she says, and I want you to know that when you come here and we worship and you show up, the worship, and she's just locked in on me. Worship is so important. Now, she didn't know that I wasn't feeling well. And her world was really going to get rocked the next day when I didn't even show. So anyway, when you hear the word worship, it's easy for us, if you've been around church for a while, to just think, oh, singing or the music. And that's what worship is to us. But I want to make a case that worship has this broader definition, and it's so much more inclusive. And I want to take a scenic view to get there. So when you're thinking about the word worship, let's say there is a compartment of that. If we could compartmentalize it to where it is the singing, there's value in that. And the gal is right. When we sing and we have music playing and we're lifting our voices high, it's powerful, and it is so important. And we've got a couple of verses in the New Testament that talk about the power of that. One says, be filled with the Spirit. Be filled with the Spirit, and actually use psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. This is Ephesians 5:19. Use psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to use those as you teach one another. That's part of the way that you're actually doing this thing. So when you think about worship, it's not just vertical. Granted, we are praising our God, but there's something horizontal that is happening that we cannot devalue. So be filled with the Spirit. Well, how? As you are with one another, with these psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So Colossians 3 is the same thing. Actually, you're going to speak to one another. So we are singing to our great God, but we're actually speaking to one another as well when we worship. We're speaking to each other, that horizontal dynamic. Speak to one another. How? Not just through the written word, but through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. There's great value in what we do. And I have to tell you, we had worship night this past week, and Hunter told me that we got the marketing out just a little late for that event. So attendance was a little low, but we want to build up on that. It's a very powerful dynamic to get together with the sole purpose of honoring our God and speaking to one another. So worship night was a fantastic opportunity, and there's going to be more opportunities to do that in the future. And we really want you to share in that experience. But I'm thinking about worship night and how we use the word worship to refer to the singing. And while that is a so important component, well, the word worship is so much more widely used in both the New Testament and the Old Testament. So I'd like to use Romans 12 as a springboard to get us into a really good biblical working understanding, a biblical idea of the word worship. So when you and I, whether you open some dated passages way back in the Old Testament or some fresh things that are more relevant to the 21st century in the New Testament, and you read the word worship, I want you and I to walk away this morning with a really good feel for what is being said. And one of the best verses to actually use as a springboard for that term is Romans 12. And we're going to spend just a little time there. Romans 12, if you've been around church for a while, is probably circled, highlighted, it's underlined. There's some reference to it in your life. Maybe you even have some kind of decor hanging in your office or your home that references Romans 12. And if you're new to the Bible or the whole church world, Romans 12, once you get your footing, find your footing with it, will become one of those texts that is extremely important and pertinent to your life. But Paul's writing to a church that has people of different backgrounds coming together in the shared space of following Jesus. And the idea of worship comes up, and he paints a beautiful picture about what this word actually represents. And he starts off in verse 1, he says, "Therefore, I urge you." So you can hear the host saying, this is so important. So he says, I urge you, and then notice there's a comma, brothers and sisters. So he's not just talking to a watching world. He's talking to people who have this shared experience. Brothers and sisters, they're in the church. They're in this community. They have shared stories that they could relay and talk about God's activity in their lives. And the activity, there's a reason for it, and the premise or the reason is God's mercy. So he says, in view, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. In other words, when we get to talking about those shared experiences or those shared stories, or you're talking about the activity of God in your life and someone's listening and like, yes, I get that. We would reach a common premise that it's only God's mercy that actually allows us to be here. And when you go back and flip the pages into the Old Testament, there's actually a book about a group of people. And they're living in an area where their town and their livelihood has just been burned down. And they have a leader come in, and a leader comes in and says, hey, let's get this thing going again. So they rally the troops and they rebuild, and it's just a phenomenal experience. Well, once they get everything back into shape and they're going to move into the future, well, one of the first things they do is they're like, hey, let's not forget what this is all about. Like, we're here, and it's great that we've rebuilt this. It's great that we're in really good shape. It's great the energy is up. The vibe is very positive, but we can't miss why or who is actually responsible for this. And when you read, this actually comes from Nehemiah 9. Just listen to this. And I referenced this at worship night, and I had one of the children who was there come up after and said, yeah, I actually counted. And I think they counted 40. So I want you to count and just listen to how many times these people direct their attention toward God. Like there's this shared experience, but they direct their energy and they direct their attention toward God as the responsible party for making all of this a reality. So listen to this. They get together and they start saying, you. So I want you to count how many times the word you in relation to God is used. You alone are God. You made the heavens. You have given life to everything. You are the Lord our God. You found people faithful. You have made a covenant with us. You have kept your promises. You saw the sufferings of our forefathers. You heard their cry. You sent a miraculous sign. You knew, so you made a name for yourself. You divided the sea. You led. You came down. You gave them regulations. You made known. You gave them bread. You told them to go. You did not desert them. You did not abandon them. You have given your good spirit. You did not withhold. And it keeps going. You gave. You made their sons as numerous as the stars. You subdued the land before you. You heard their cry. You gave them deliverance. You warned them. You were patient with them. You admonished them. You did not put an end to them or abandon them, for you are a gracious and merciful God. There's a reason we're here, and it's in view of God's mercy. That's the reason. So Paul goes on in Romans 12 and he says, if that's the reason, that's the shared premise, this merciful God, well, that requires or demands, if you will, a response from us. If we're here because of his mercy, that reason demands a response from us. So he goes on, he says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. So we see this word taking on a broader meaning than just singing. It's becoming much more inclusive, kind of like the phrase, my boy. So I was Starbucks, surprise, right? I was at Starbucks some time ago, and I'm in this corner seat. It's kind of a longer table, and there's a corner right there, and it's right across from the door. So the door opens, and these 4 young adults come in. There's 2 guys, 2 gals. I thought they were couples based on the way they walked in, but turns out only one was a couple, and the other 2 were just really good friends. So they come in, and they sit at the table right beside of me, and I'm watching them, observing them, and I have this just impulse to connect with them, probably because the guys remind me a lot of my son, similar in age, and they also have these jackets on called battle jackets or a battle vest. So a battle vest is where you take like a denim jacket, blue or black, doesn't matter. You just shred the sleeves off of it so it's frayed on the ends right there. And then you attach pins or buttons or patches based on bands you like or concerts you've been to. And theirs were pretty cool. And I'm thinking, that looks a lot like my son's, and that's my in. That's how I can connect. So start looking, scrolling through my phone, and I find a picture of Christian with his battle vest that shows it really good. So get all my stuff together, and I stand up and I'm like, hey, you all call those battle vests, right? And they're like, yeah. And when you connect with someone based on something in their world that's important to them, people just light up. So they just light up, and they're so polite, just really good young adults. And they're like, yeah, we call these battle vests. I'm like, well, my son actually, he invests a lot of time into his battle jacket. And I show him this picture. I'm like, this is his. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. That looks really, really good. I'm like, yeah, he spent a lot of time just sewing those patches on, and he likes to have the thread a certain color and a certain shape. There's like a design to it around the patches. They're like, it's awesome. I'm like, yeah. That's my boy. That's my boy. Then I put my phone away and I go about my business. Well, about a week later, I'm in the mall, Fayette Mall, and I'm walking down, and in the center, people should walk on the right, people should walk on the left when you're walking, right? Okay, don't get me started with the driving again, okay? I won't go that direction. But anyway, you're walking down, and in the center, there are these kiosks or these small stores, right? With usually calendars or jewelry or perfume or something like that. Well, there's one that's popped up a couple of years ago, and they've got this great shoe cleaning stuff. I know it's the latest, greatest shoe cleaning stuff. So I target this guy like 100 yards out. I could just see him, because if you've been walking through the mall, you know that they'll just find people and they'll try to reach out some kind of free sample or whatever and connect. Usually it's girls and hair stuff. Hey, put this on your hair or something like that. So I see this guy, and I bet he's going to target me. I know he's going to lock in on me and try to get me to this. So I see him and I'm trying to avoid and kind of fall behind people and just miss the whole negotiation thing because two reasons. One, I'm calculating some numbers. It's right before Christmas. I'm trying to get some stuff sorted out and I'm in my own head and I don't want that messed up. And then also I'm thinking, well, if he pitches it right, he's going to sell it to me. And I'm going to waste 20, 25 bucks on something I really don't want. So anyway, I'm going there and he sees me and he locks in just like I knew he would. So I make a quick dart to the left and go over here. And then I hear him say, my boy. And it's like, I know he's going to try to sell this shoe stuff. And I'm like, I know he's talking to me. I'm the only one in this little demographic right here that would fit a description. My boy. So he goes on to have on this teal blue hoodie. And I walk a little farther and it's like, my boy in the hoodie, in the blue hoodie, my boy. So I go on and eventually it just fades out, my boy. And I just go on my business. But anyway, my boy, that's my boy. My boy. See, when I say my boy and I hold this picture up of my son, I'm referring to Christian Green. It's very specific. And sometimes we use the word worship like that. We say worship and we're using it very specifically to say this is the time we sing collectively and we're filled with the Spirit. We do that psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs thing. But over time, the word worship actually expanded. It was more inclusive. It wasn't just ritualistic. It wasn't just reserved for the temple with ancient Israel. No, Jesus put a new spin on the idea of worship, and that started to take root in the church world. So when Paul comes along and he says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. You know, this is your spiritual act of worship, offering your body, offering your whole self, offering all the time. Those moments of worship and those moments when you're away from the worship. It's all inclusive. It's more of a my boy that could apply to anyone in the moment. Worship is taking on a broader meaning. It's not just ritualistic. It's the rhythm of your life as well. That's the response we have to God's mercy. Well, this response, though, requires some reworking. I mean, you and I have been human long enough to know it's not that easy. It's not that simple. So he goes on and he says, my brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing. This is your spiritual act of worship. Then he goes on and he says, now here's the reworking that has to happen. Don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So there's some things in your life and my life that we're going to have to renew by the way we think about them. And this is where life, this is where your reality, this is where the gospel begins to take root and rework. So you're not just conforming. You're being transformed by the premise of His mercy, His activity in your life and my life. It makes me think of last week, that special moment when we said, hey, take this piece of paper and write that word on it that represents the stuff that needs to take a different shape or change or go away in your life. And let's meet over here at the cross and just crumple it up, rip it up, shred it up, and leave it there. That's a great analogy of people stepping up, lining up and saying, you know what? I'm going to think in the new year, I'm going to think differently about this detail of my life. I'm going to start thinking differently about how this has affected me. The way that this takes root and takes shape in my life, that's going to change. And I'm going to make sure I'm not just conforming to whatever label is written here, but I'm going to be transformed by how I think about this. So he says, that's your reworking. And then for a pastor, as a pastor, this is one of my favorite parts. And when I teach Romans 12, I always teach it from this 4R perspective. The reason, God's mercy, which requires or demands a response from us, which is worship as a living sacrifice holistically in life. And that requires some reworking where we're not conforming, but we're being transformed. And then there's a reward. There's a reward after that occurs. And you'll notice in Romans 12, Paul says, then. Not before that, But after understanding the premise, after responding, after the reworking, then you will be able to test and approve what the will of the Lord is, His good, pleasing, holy, perfect will. As a pastor, that's important to me because one of the most frequently asked questions, like if pastors had their own website for all the pastors in the world, and there was an FAQ section, the number one question would be, what is God's will for my life? What is God's will for my life? What's the activity? What is He doing? Where do I go? How do I know that this is God operating in my life? Well, you have a reason. He's active in your life because of His mercy, and that's why you're here. And you're going to respond to that by saying, you've got my life. It's not just Sunday morning. It's not just worship service. It's not just a ritual. No, it's the rhythm of your life. And it's okay. But we're going to take some time to rework what it looks like for you to not conform, but to be transformed. And then you'll be able to test and see and understand and approve, oh, that's God's activity in my life. That's God in my life. So here's why that's important. We're starting a series this morning called The Next Right Thing, following God into the unknown. And we're going to start with an Old Testament character called Abraham. And I just want to give you one little detail of his life. And this comes from Genesis 22. You don't have to turn there. You don't have to follow along. But Abraham was a guy that God was stirring some stuff, shaking some stuff up in his life. And the question for Abraham was, where do I see God's activity? Where is this God and where is this me? Where is this God leading me forward and where is this just me moving my own life forward? And he worked some stuff out. And this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time next week. But he worked some stuff out. And actually God says, I'm going to give you a son. And then I'm going to use him to bring in another son. And I'm going to use him to bring in another son and eventually bless the entire world. So the son that is given to Abraham is extremely important. So for the son of Abraham to go away would seemingly distort and disrupt the plan of God. So we come to a section in Genesis 22, a phase in Abraham's life where God comes to him and says, Abraham, I need you to do something. You know that son I promised you and that I was going to eventually use to bless the entire world? Well, I need you to offer him as a sacrifice in worship. His boy. So Abraham is like, what? But let's read it. And I'll read it to you. And then I want you to see verse 5. So sometime later, God actually tested Abraham. And he said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, here I am. Then God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. I can see Abraham going, wait, my boy? My boy? He's the promised God. If I offer him as a sacrifice, what? Story goes on. Well, early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. And when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. And then notice verse 5. We got it on the screen. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey. This is so good. While I and the boy go over there. And then he drops this line. We will worship. And then we will come back to you. We will come back. That's why later on in the New Testament authors pick up and say, Abraham reasoned that God must be able to raise the dead because he couldn't break his promise. He couldn't invalidate this. So what we see in Abraham right now is a guy who has made some transitions in his life where he's accepted that reason, which is the mercy of God. And he's responded to it by giving himself fully to the will of God in worship. And then he's reworked what it means to not conform, but be transformed by the way he's thinking about his life. And now he's at a spot to where even when it doesn't make sense, when it's unknown, he knows how to make or do the next right thing. So we're going to worship, and we're going to come back to you. Now, in this phrase right here, this particular text, it's a Hebrew word that we translate the word worship, and it literally means to bow down. No singing, just bowing down. So you've got this guy, Abraham, walking into the unknown, and the next right thing that he knows to do is simply come and bow before his God, because he's been able to trust him up until this moment. What a great phrase for you and I. So think about it. Maybe this is hitting you on a deeper level because you've never metaphorically bowed down before him and just surrendered. You've never worshiped and said, you know what? I've given you bits and pieces, but never the full control of my life. Not a living sacrifice by any means. But now's an opportunity for you to do that. Kick the new year off right. Say, you know what? I need to align myself with him. He is the reason for everything. He is the reason I'm here. And I'm going to respond to that in the right way, because he always responds to me in the right time and the right way. And with that phrase, we will worship, and then we'll come back. Well, that's where we'll pick up next Sunday. Father, we love you. And we say that the best that we possibly can, trying in this moment to align our hearts and minds with you and your ways. But we also want to say, we know you love us. And we thank you for everything you've given us. And we thank you, Father, for your mercy that ultimately leads us to an understanding of your activity in our lives, so that we can move into the unknown. And in doing so, even though the future is uncertain or unclear, we can be filled with the confidence that we are doing the next right thing. And Father, we want to make sure that that's what we're doing, and that is worship. So use this time of singing, of communion, of teaching, and then your Spirit with us as we leave to help us work out what worship looks like in our lives. Father, we praise you in the name of your Son, Jesus, as always. Amen.